afternoon. I want to welcome you to Dr. Clark 101, the Living Classroom. My name is Professor George Amity. Dr. Clark is out of town, so I'll be doing his show today. And of course, the first Wednesday of every month, Dr. Clark 101, we do Politics 101, the Living Classroom. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So today, I'm soloing Dr. Clark. I hope you're having fun wherever you are. And there are so many issues on the plate that we need to discuss with respect to politics. And so we're going to start from the top with respect to global politics, and then we'll move to national politics. And last but not least, we'll go through local politics. Let's begin with global politics. Of course, the biggest issue with respect to global politics is the Iran and Israeli conflict and the involvement of the United States in that particular conflict. Of course, many have been talking about the relationship that the United States has in this particular conflict and have used the expression of the tail wagging the dog, meaning that the moves that Israel make, the United States are committed to follow through and that they're leading us. But the action that President Trump took with respect to bombing the sites, the nuclear sites in Iran, kind of gives us another version of what's going on. And that version is that no longer we see the tail wagging the dog, but we see that the U.S. is really a lead partner with respect to the decisions by using our bombers to eliminate the sites of Iran nuclear facilities. Now let's just talk about that in terms of where we are with respect to that. Of course, the question becomes, we know that negotiation was ended. Initially, President Trump indicated that he would give them 2 weeks, but before the 2 weeks was up, he proceeded to bomb. And then, of course, we also noticed that all negotiations with respect to coming to a diplomatic settlement was also taken off the table. Now, of course, many in the Western world, and particularly many of our allies, particularly Israel, is very satisfied with the fact that Iran no longer has the facilities. However, we're not really sure whether or not those major bombing activities, in fact, were done at the places where there was enhanced nuclear material. Do we know that the enhanced nuclear material was at those particular locations? So we have very little evidence of verification. Iran has rejected the international community from coming in and examining that. And of course, they've cut off their diplomatic negotiations with Israel and the United States. And of course, although the big question with respect to that is whether or not there will be some effort or retaliation as a result of this bombing. As a result of this bombing. One thing we learned from the Vietnam War that it's virtually impossible to bomb countries into submission. So we have to expect that if Iran, its cohorts, if they get an opportunity to extract some revenge on the United States, that will happen. Let's move on to another issue on the international scene, particularly with respect to, well, somewhat international, but somewhat domestic, is respect to tariffs and the tariffs' impact on economic uncertainty, as well as the war of words between our northern, the country Canada that occupies our northern border, and Mexico, our southern border. The question here is, what impact will that have on our economy? It seems now that we have to wait and see because Canada has increased the tariffs on our products, and we in turn have increased the tariffs on their products. Let me just pause for a minute and welcome in one of my former students, Dr. Don Terry Veal, who's sitting in with me today, who is the Chief of Staff and Vice President at Morgan State University. And Don and I go back a long way, and when from the days of my teaching him at SUNO, but also working with him when he was director of the Center for Governmental Services. So what I want to do when we get towards the end of the program, to have Dr. Veal to talk a little bit and weigh in with respect to what's going on with Morgan State, especially since this is one of the exemplary HBCUs in the country, and just give us a little insight on the current day student from his observation and the kinds of things that they are doing and what they should be doing in the current political environment that we're in. Let me move on to a second issue, of course, and this one is the latest one in the bill, and I haven't seen what's happening of late, and that is the question of the big, beautiful bill as it's described by the president and the Republican Party. And this is a bill that right now we know was passed in the Senate, the U.S. Senate, and it's awaiting a decision of the U.S. House. And there was some question about whether or not the bill would be able to get out of the U.S. Senate. We know from Politics 101, in order for a bill to become law, that bill or that reconciliation in terms of a budget reconciliation would have to be approved by a majority vote of both chambers of Congress. We know that the House passed the bill, the Senate passed the bill, but they cannot be, it cannot become law until there's a consensus on two identical bills. So there are aspects of the bill in the House, on the House version of the big, beautiful bill, as it's called, and there's also different aspects to the Senate bill. And so now we're back at the House, and the question that was similarly raised in the Senate had to do whether or not they had enough votes to pass it. And of course, had one more U.S. senator voted against the bill, it would have gone down in defeat. But since there were only three U.S. senators that didn't voted negatively in the Republican Party, then it created what we call a 50-50 tie vote. And according to the Constitution, or if there's a 50-50 tie vote, the vice president, in this case, Vice President Vance, had the final say in the passage in the Senate. But the House has its different priorities. The Senate has its different priorities, and the House has its its different wings or different factions, particularly the conservative factions, who are very uncomfortable about the impact of this bill on the deficit. And so it's not really clear. And of course, the margin of here is also 3 votes. And if all of the Democratic members stick together, then in fact, that bill would not be passed. So my prediction is, and this is what occurred in the U.S. Senate, the president used his lobbying to get that last vote in the Senate. How you do that? You make a promise of some type of commitment of funds or program to a senator. In this case, it was Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, who was opposed to the bill because of the impact of the bill on her rural constituents, particularly in the area of cutting Medicaid for rural areas. So the big bill had a major components, and some of the things we know that it increased spending for military, it increased spending for immigration, but it created tax credits and incentives for the more wealthy. But the losers in the big bill was in fact the safety net that is in place to cover those who, with respect to food, with respect to health care, with respect to housing, with respect to basic kinds of things, that they were the losers in that, because the money for those areas were cut in order to fund the president's priorities. And so Lisa Murkowski did, in fact, initially oppose the bill, but later on voted for it once the president put a special pot of money in there for Alaska. And that's the way presidents do that. Another interesting observation about the big, beautiful bill is that another major figure who came out against the big, beautiful bill was none other than Elon Musk. And we've heard a lot about Elon Musk. He's a very, very, one of the richest persons in the world, has very much influence. He was head of Doge, which was the agency created to supposedly attain efficiency. And so he initially opposed it, came back and agreed with it, and now since it is then came back for the Senate passage and said he opposed it again. So this is an interesting break, the kind of dynamics we see in the Republican Party, in the conservative coalition, where those who are in the party and in the coalition are opposed to this bill. In the case of Elon Musk, he happens to be involved with EVs, electronic vehicles, and all of that, and has benefited greatly from the subsidies that have been allotted for, uh, electronic vehicles and other types of alternative energy. And in this particular case, it hurt his bottom line, and he came out to oppose the big, beautiful bill. And the most interesting thing he said, I'm going to be in the position either to create another party other than the Democratic and Republican Party, which is very interesting, or to primary or to run candidates, pick candidates to oppose those members of the Senate and those members of the House who support this bill. So we have to wait and see what's going to happen with that, because we know the money is the mother's milk of politics. And Elon Musk has lots of money. Of course, I count the President Trump as being the winner on this, because he's only been in there 6 months, and we at least have another year before the election. And he said, "Well, I can do a lot of damage to Elon Musk. I can reduce his money he's getting from the federal government and send him back to South Africa." So it's interesting to see this conflict that's going on within the Republican Party. So wait and see what's going to happen in the House, whether or not the president will be able to bring those factions opposed to the big, beautiful bill in line. Let me move on to other things. And of course, the next thing that I want to talk about is the U.S. Supreme Court and the decisions of the U.S. Supreme Court. Because, if anyone has been in this program, you know that my perspective with respect to what's going on I've used terms like fascism, I've used terms like authoritarianism, and whether or not the United States, in fact, Dr. Veal and myself, we did an article with respect to whether the United States is drifting to an authoritarian state. And so part of that has to do with the idea of whether the checks and balances and the norms are in place to put executive power into check. And one of the major sources for putting executive power into check is the U.S. Supreme Court. So we know the big issue was that everyone was waiting for was the issue of birthright citizenship. That is the idea that anyone born in this country, whether their parents are born in this country or how long they've been in the country, if they're born in this country, then they automatically gain citizenship. And we saw that what the Supreme Court did with respect to that was saying not so much, answering the question about whether birthright citizenship is still valid, but answering the larger question of whether a federal district or court of appeal judge has the authority to actually nullify actions of the executive branch that has national implications. So that was really the question that was answered. The question of birthright citizenship still today is in place. The problem is that the Supreme Court wasn't crystal clear about this. And if you know anything about this administration, they assume when the courts is not crystal clear, they assume the interpretation of their own attorney general. A second thing we learned about them, that the time that it takes for issues to emerge to the court gives the president enough time to do the things that he wants to do. So this was a very interesting. However, let me just say this. Their federal district courts are still making court decisions that are tying the hands of the administration. The most recent one has to do with, and surprisingly, with the status of Haitians who've been in this country for over 12 years and had a protective status. And because the court ruled that they could not send those Haitians out of the country, but think about what that means, the implication for the Supreme Court. It means that federal courts and both federal district courts and as well as courts of appeal are only confined, especially if they're organizations. Now, states, a group of states can bring have standing in terms of bringing a particular issue. But those organizations, when they bring something, their decisions are only good for the districts and the circuit court districts and the federal districts. So that's one that we need to keep watching. We also saw some federal district decisions with respect to hiring of HHS, Health and Human Source, and so we're still seeing the courts weighing in on that as well. Most of the time we're in Dr. Clark's show, we run out of time with respect to domestic local politics. So I'm going to go straight to that. So to make sure that we get that comment on. And the first one has to do with the entry of State Senator Royce Duplessis into the mayoral race. The entry of State Senator Royce Duplessis obviously reconfigures or reset the table. Now, in my opinion anyway, with respect to elections, the most important day of the election is the day of the election. The second most important is the week before the election. The other most important is the month before the election. And we've learned in politics that anything can happen a month before the election, the week of the election, and of course, if you don't have the wherewithal to protect your vote on election day, or the wherewithal to have people out on the street getting your vote out, so those to me are the most important factors. But in terms of the speculation of people saying people got things locked up, it's too early to tell. We don't know who else is going to get in the race. We don't know what kind of bombs in terms of people's background and the things they have done in their background is going to come out that can change the election. But clearly it's a reset, and the idea is whether or not he's going to take votes from. They're speculating that it's going to be the two major African-American candidates, but that's not necessarily the case. So we have to wait and see. With respect to Sheriff Hudson and the budget situation, I just want to add in a little education because, Orleans Parish is different from every parish, the other 63 parishes, because it's the only parish that does not have an unincorporated area. In fact, the city of New Orleans is coterminous with the Orleans Parish. And for that reason, the Orleans Parish Sheriff's Office is not part of the city of New Orleans. Let me repeat that again. The Orleans Parish is a state entity and is not part of. And the responsibility was laid out where the responsibility for collecting the taxes lie with the city of New Orleans. That's basically what it is, and appropriating the money that from the taxes that go towards that. So in that particular case, I think Sheriff Hudson is right about the fact of the obligation of the city for providing money from taxes that they are sanctioned to collect on behalf of the sheriff's office. Now, the controversy in the budget is about accountability and the brass system. And the only thing I want to say about that is she's correct. The brass system doesn't satisfy all her needs. There should be some compromise on that. Lastly, I'm going to have Dr. Veal. I've left it with a few minutes to talk about what's going on with respect to students in this area. I apologize.
No, this was outstanding. Dr. George Amity, listen, you brought me back to the classroom, and I always welcome everything you have to say, particularly with respect to politics. And for those who may not know me, New Orleans is home for me. And of course, I'm born and raised here. But I will say for the most part, when it comes to students, Dr. George, we have a situation where students are in a position where they can learn so much today. They can learn what's not just from historical perspective and talk about politics as in the 1930s and the 1920s, and talk about American governance from those perspectives, and say, okay, it's an exciting topic, but nevertheless, I wasn't there. The changes that are actually happening today are happening with their eyes wide open. So what an opportunity for students to learn about political science and issues around governance. And they couldn't get a better professor other than Dr. George Amity himself. Thank you for being here. I certainly appreciate this. But I would like to finalize by saying that New Orleans is an exciting place, and what an exciting opportunity for the city. Thank you, Dirk.
Okay, we want to thank you once again for joining us with Dr. Clark 101, The Living Classroom, Politics 101, Introduction to Politics. And as Dr. Clark would say, it's been a pleasure.
From the campus of Xavier University,
Look.
WBOK Go and Equity Media Station.